My wife thought I'd never check her deleted messages, but what I found led me to someone I never expected. And if you told me a year ago that one quiet Tuesday night in our Raleigh living room would blow apart everything I thought I knew about my marriage because of a few permanently deleted texts, I would have laughed and called you paranoid. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 42, an IT consultant for a cybersecurity firm. The guy companies bring in to lock down their systems and teach employees not to click suspicious links. And the joke is that I spent years warning strangers about digital dangers while never imagining I'd need to take a closer look at my own wife's phone. Lauren is 38, a nurse practitioner at a clinic, warm brown eyes and an easy smile, the kind of person people instinctively trust. We've been married 12 years, no kids, just the two of us in a quiet cul-de-sac with a golden doodle named Milo, a coffee habit and routines, Friday takeout, Sunday pancakes, dinners where we swapped stories about difficult days. I used to take comfort in how boring we were. Boring meant stable, stable meant safe, or so I thought. The first crack came on an ordinary Sunday. We were on the couch, Milo between us, when Lauren's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen, and in that split second before she flipped it face down, I caught something on her face I'd never seen before, a flicker of guilt, quickly smoothed over. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Work," she said too fast, already standing. "We've got a complicated case tomorrow. I should answer this." She walked into the kitchen, and a few seconds later I heard her laugh in that low, private way people use when they don't want to be overheard. It was small, but after that I started noticing other small things. Her phone, which used to live on the counter or in her bag, suddenly became an extra limb, always in her hand, always screen down. Notification previews changed from full text to notification. She started taking calls in the hallway, saying it's just work stuff, but never putting them on speaker like she used to. When you work in cybersecurity, you're trained to see patterns, secrecy, changed settings, new habits. When you're a husband who loves his wife, you're trained to give the benefit of the doubt. For a while, love won. I told myself she was stressed, exhausted, sick of bringing work home. Then came the Tuesday that shoved me out of denial. At 6 p.m., she texted that she'd be on a late shift, crazy backlog, might not be home until 10, love you, so I swung by her favorite Thai place, grabbed dinner, and decided to surprise her at the clinic. It felt like a good husband move, a small bright moment in a long day. The parking lot was half empty when I pulled in. Most lights on Lauren's side of the building were off. I sat there with a bag of pad thai cooling on the passenger seat watching the entrance. No patients, no staff. I called her. It rang twice and went to voicemail. A minute later a text appeared, "Sorry, in with a patient, can't talk." I looked up at the dark windows. A thin, cold thread slid through my chest. I drove around back. One light was on in the administrative wing. I recognized the office manager's car, but not Lauren's. She wasn't there. I drove home with untouched food and a knot in my stomach. When she came in at 10:15, hair slightly mussed, scrubs swapped for leggings and a sweatshirt, she kissed my cheek, apologized for the brutal double shift, and told me about a difficult patient and hours of charting. The outline matched her earlier text. The details were vague, not like her usual case stories. For the first time in 12 years, I realized I didn't believe my wife. I still didn't confront her. Partly because I was scared of the answer, partly because I don't like accusing people without evidence. That night while she slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, her phone face down on the nightstand, thinking about the way she'd recently run out of storage, how she'd mentioned turning off our old message backup because it kept duplicating things, how she'd started deleting threads more often than photos. Most people don't understand how backups work. I do. A few days later, when Lauren went shopping with a coworker on a Saturday and Milo and I were left alone, I sat at my desk, heart pounding harder than it ever had during a routine test, and logged into our shared iCloud account. Her phone was listed there, our photos, our old backups. The automatic text backup was off, but an older backup from about 6 weeks earlier still sat in the account, quietly taking up space. I hovered over it, feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Once I opened it, there would be no going back to maybe it's nothing. I downloaded it. Thousands of messages filled my screen, our conversations, memes, grocery lists, her exchanges with her sister and coworkers. I filtered for items marked deleted. In most systems, delete is really just hide. At first it was harmless, appointment confirmations, spam, and old group chat. Then I saw a thread from an unsaved number, 10 digits with no name, all of its recent messages marked deleted. The first visible line from him read, "Last night was dangerous but worth it." My throat closed. Her reply, erased on her phone but preserved in the backup, sat underneath. "You're terrible for my self-control. I can't stop thinking about you." My eyes burned as I scrolled. There were references to meeting closer to your side of town, jokes about her white coat being a good cover for late nights, reminders to delete this after reading, and timing that lined up perfectly with her supposed extra shifts. There it was, in black and white, an affair, not a one-off mistake but a pattern. Milo whined at my feet as if he could feel my world tilting. I could have stopped there, but the number itself gnawed at me. It looked familiar, like a song you can't quite name. On reflex, I copied it and searched across my files. An old spreadsheet popped up, Jenna contacts, a list I'd made when my younger sister switched phones after her last breakup. I opened it and scrolled until my gaze landed on that same 10-digit string. The name next to it punched the air out of my lungs. It wasn't some random coworker. It wasn't a stranger from a bar. The number belonged to Mark Lawson, my best friend since freshman year of college, the man who'd stood beside me as best man at our wedding, the guy who showed up most Sundays to watch games and raid my fridge, the person I'd trusted with every major secret of my life. And suddenly, my wife is cheating became my wife and my best friend have been lying to my face. And I just sat there in my office chair, staring at the screen, feeling everything I thought was solid in my life start to crack open. When I saw Mark Lawson's name beside that number, something inside me went cold. Not the wild, explosive rage I always assumed people felt when confronted with betrayal, but a deep, heavy numbness. Like falling into water so cold your body doesn't realize it's drowning yet. And I just sat there staring at that spreadsheet while Milo whined and nudged my knee because he could sense something was wrong, something deeply wrong. The kind of wrong that rearranges a person's entire understanding of the last decade in a single heartbeat. Mark had been part of my life for 20 years of late-night study sessions, shared apartments, weddings, barbecues, career changes, heartbreaks, the kind of friend you don't even call friend anymore because it feels too small. He was supposed to be family, the brother I never had, the person I trusted to tell me when I was being stupid or stubborn or oblivious. And now I was staring at messages that proved he'd been lying straight to my face while sitting on my couch eating wings and watching football, pretending everything was fine while sneaking around with my wife like the kind of villain you only expect in bad movies, not real life. The screenshots blurred as my eyes filled, and I pushed back from the desk so hard the chair rolled into the wall. I stood in the middle of the room shaking, not from anger but from the sheer shock of realizing the two people closest to me had built a whole separate world behind my back, a world where I was the punchline to inside jokes and carefully deleted texts, a world where trust was a joke they told each other at my expense. I walked into the kitchen on autopilot, filled a glass with water, didn't drink it, just stared at it, because suddenly even the most ordinary actions felt unreal, as if I'd stepped into some alternate version of my own life. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to call both of them and demand explanations they didn't deserve. But my mind, the same part of me that made me good at my job, wouldn't let me react emotionally. It told me to sit down, breathe, gather facts, secure evidence, because feelings could lie but data couldn't, and if I ever wanted answers, not revenge, not destruction, but truth, I needed to be steady, not reckless. So I went back to my office, sat down, and reopened the backup with steadier hands. I read every message in that deleted thread, line by line, each one a small cut that collectively felt like a wound I wasn't sure I could recover from. Can't stop thinking about last week. She suspects I'm seeing someone, but she thinks it's a girl from the gym. Don't park in front of his house next time. Delete this. I miss you. When are you telling him about the promotion? That last message made me stop, scroll back, read again. Promotion? My wife's clinic hadn't mentioned any organizational changes. I kept reading until I found it. Mark bragging about helping Lauren polish her interview pitch and put in a good word with my contacts when the board reviews come around. Contacts, Mark worked in real estate development. What board was he talking about? None of it made sense until I remembered that Mark's company had recently donated to the healthcare foundation Lauren's clinic was part of. That donation had put him in the same rooms as board members and administrators. He had access. He had influence. He had used both on her. I kept scrolling and the context became clearer. My best friend hadn't just been sleeping with my wife. He'd been helping her chase a career move, pushing her to step into a position her clinic hadn't even announced yet, telling her he believed in her more than I did. And that part stung almost as much as the affair. The implication that I'd somehow failed her, that I wasn't enough support for her ambitions, that she'd found someone else who was more exciting, more confident, more driven, all phrases sprinkled through their texts. I sat there breathing hard, Milo's head on my knee, and I realized something important. I wasn't angry because she'd been chasing a dream. I was angry because she hadn't trusted me enough to chase it with me. I took photos of every message, backed them up on an encrypted drive, because even though this wasn't about revenge, I needed to protect myself emotionally and practically. If either of them tried to rewrite the story later, I needed the truth. And then I did something I never expected to do. I called my sister Jenna. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and oblivious, and the moment she said, "Hey, Ethan." "What's up?" My throat tightened so fast I could barely speak. I wasn't someone who broke easily, and Jenna wasn't someone I burdened with my problems unless they were serious, so when I choked out, "Jen, I think Lauren and Mark," she went silent so suddenly I thought the call dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, softer, dangerous in a protective sibling way I rarely heard. "Tell me everything," she said. I did, every detail, every text, every realization. By the time I finished, Jenna's tone had shifted from shock to something like fury. Ethan, she said slowly, I need to tell you something, and I'm sorry, I should have told you months ago. My pulse jumped. What? She exhaled shakily. I didn't have proof, and I didn't want to blow up your life without evidence, but Mark, he's made comments. Weird comments about how you didn't appreciate what you had, about how Lauren was outgrowing the marriage, about how changes were coming. I thought he was being cryptic or stupid, but now, she trailed off. I pressed a hand over my face. Why didn't you say anything? Because you love him, she said simply. Because you trust him, because I thought I was imagining things. And because I didn't want to be the reason your life fell apart if I was wrong. I swallowed throat tight. You weren't wrong. Jenna hesitated. Do you want me to come over? No, I said, though part of me did. I need to process this alone. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Hours passed. Darkness filled the windows. My house, the home I shared with Lauren, felt unfamiliar, like I was walking through someone else's life. I couldn't confront her that night, not without a plan, not in the emotional hurricane I was in. Instead, I needed clarity, so I made a list because that's what I do when chaos hits. 1. Gather full evidence. 2. Confirm timeline. 3. Confront Lauren. 4. Confront Mark separately. 5. Decide path forward. Marriage counseling. Separation. Something else. But as I wrote the last item, Milo barked at the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Lauren's car pulled in. I looked at the clock, earlier than usual. I wiped my face, closed the laptop, and walked to the doorway. She stepped inside carrying a bag of groceries and wearing a tired smile. Hey babe, she said, leaning in to kiss me. I stepped back. Her smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. Ethan, what's wrong? I stared at her, not the woman I thought she was, but the woman she'd chosen to be without me, with someone who wasn't me, with someone I trusted like a brother. And that was the moment I realized something else. She had no idea her secret world had collapsed. Not yet, but she would. And I would make sure the truth came out calmly, clearly, without shouting, without revenge, but with the weight of everything she'd thrown away. Lauren, I said quietly, we need to talk. Her face paled, fear flickering in her eyes. About what? About deleted messages, I said, and just like that, the truth stepped into the room with us. When I said deleted messages, Lauren's hand tightened around the grocery bag so sharply that one of the plastic handles snapped. A box of pasta tumbling onto the hardwood floor as she stared at me like I'd just spoken a language she didn't understand, except she understood perfectly. I could see it in the way her pupils dilated, in the way her breath hitched, in the way she didn't immediately ask, what messages? But instead said, a fraction too late, what are you talking about? And that delay told me more than any explanation she could have rehearsed. I bent down, picked up the fallen box, set it on the counter, buying myself a second to steady my voice because I didn't want to come at this like a screaming, raging husband. I wanted to come at it like the man who'd spent his career separating lies from truth, signals from noise. The ones you thought were gone, I said evenly. The ones you told him to delete, the ones you deleted yourself. The ones in the backup from 6 weeks ago that you forgot still existed. For a split second, she tried one last denial, a weak, Ethan, I don't know what you think you, and I cut her off not by shouting, but by placing my phone on the counter, screen facing her, displaying a screenshot of her message. You're terrible for my self-control, I can't stop thinking about you. Her own words stared back at her, the date and time stamped neatly underneath, followed by Mark's reply, delete this after you read it. The color drained from her face, she reached for the phone, fingers shaking. Where did you? I work in cybersecurity, Lauren, I said quietly. Did you really think delete meant disappear forever? Did you think I'd never notice your shifts, your settings, your late nights that don't match the clinic's schedule? Tears sprang to her eyes, but instead of collapsing into immediate apology, she did what people often do when cornered by their own choices. She tried to dodge. You had no right to go through my phone. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it was. I didn't go through your phone, I said, keeping my tone level. I went through our shared backup. You turned off your sync but left the old copy. You didn't cover your tracks as well as you thought. Her jaw clenched, 100 responses flickering behind her eyes. For a moment, I thought she'd double down, blame me, accuse me of violating her privacy. But then something broke in her posture. Her shoulders sagged. She slid into a chair at the table and buried her face in her hands. How much did you see? She whispered. Enough, I said. Enough to know it's been going on for months. Enough to know you lied every time you said you had a double shift or an extra meeting. Enough to know it's not just some random guy. It's Mark. At his name, she flinched like I'd struck her. Ethan, please, she choked. I'm Mark Lawson, I continued, because I needed to say it aloud to drag that truth fully into the light. My best friend. The man who sits on this couch on Sundays, the guy who toasted us at our wedding, that Mark, that's who you chose. Tears slid down her cheeks and she wiped them away angrily. I didn't choose, you did, I said quietly. Every time you texted him, every time you lied to me, every time you told him to park around the corner so the neighbors wouldn't notice, every time you deleted a message, those were choices. Silence settled between us, thick and heavy. Milo padded over to her chair, whining softly. Out of habit, she reached down to scratch his ears, then stopped, fingers curling into fists instead. How long? I asked finally. How long has it been going on? She delayed not out of calculation, but because she was sifting through her own memories, choosing where to draw the line between emotional and physical, between accidental and intentional. It started in the spring, she said finally, voice hoarse. At that fundraiser, the one for the foundation. I remembered it clearly. Mark had been there, charming donors, working the room with his easy confidence, and Lauren had laughed more that night than I'd seen in weeks. I was stressed, she continued quickly as if rushing to justify it. Burned out. You were buried in that big security contract, working late every night. I felt invisible. Mark was there. He asked real questions. He listened. It didn't start as she trailed off, unable to say the word. You didn't trip and fall into an affair, I said. It escalated: texts, drinks, hotel rooms. Those are steps, deliberate ones. She flinched but didn't argue. Do you love him? I asked, the question I'd been trying to avoid but couldn't. She looked up sharply, eyes red and swollen. I don't know, she said, and the honesty of it almost hurt more than a clean yes or no. I thought I did sometimes. He made me feel exciting again, like I wasn't just the wife who cooked, cleaned, and listened to your work stories about firewalls and phishing attempts. He made me feel seen. So you needed him to see you, I said slowly, and you needed me to stay blind. The words landed between us with a finality that made her wince. Ethan, that's not fair, she whispered. Isn't it? I asked. You didn't give me a chance to see you differently. You didn't say, hey, I'm drowning here, help me. You went straight to, I found someone who makes me feel alive, and decided I'd be the last to know. She opened her mouth, then closed it, because no matter how much she wanted to distribute blame evenly, there was a part of this that sat squarely at her feet. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said finally, voice cracking. It was just talking at first, then drinks. Then one night I crossed a line and told myself it was a mistake, and then I kept crossing it. Why Mark? I asked. Out of everyone in the world, why my best friend? She looked down at her hands. Because he was there, because he understood you. Because he said he knew how hard you worked and how you never took a break and how sometimes he worried you'd wake up at 50 and realize you'd lived more for clients than for yourself. He made it sound like he was looking out for both of us. I let out a sharp breath. He used me to justify what he was doing to me. She nodded, tears sliding down her face again. I know how it sounds. I know how awful it is. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I need you to know it didn't come from hating you. It came from being stupid and selfish and wanting to feel something different. Different than what? I asked, genuinely curious. Different than safe. She looked up, startled because I'd hit something. You're predictable, she said, the words spilling out now raw. In good ways. You pay the bills on time. You show up when you say you will. You don't cheat, you don't gamble, you don't drink too much. You're solid, and I loved that. But somewhere along the way it started to feel like we were just roommates who occasionally kissed. I tried to tell you, but every time I brought up feeling restless or bored, you'd suggest a weekend trip, not a deeper change. So instead of asking for that deeper change, I said, you found it with someone else. She nodded miserably. I let that settle for a moment, then took a slow breath. Lauren, I need you to understand something. What you did hurt me more than I can explain. You didn't just cheat on me, you turned our entire life into a cover story. You used my trust as a shield, and you involved Mark, knowing exactly what he meant to me. That's not something we can sweep under the rug. There will be consequences for us for this marriage. Her lower lip trembled. Are you leaving? I didn't answer immediately because the truth was I didn't know yet. My heart wanted to pack a bag and vanish. My mind, ever methodical, wanted time to assess to see if there was anything worth salvaging. I'm not making decisions tonight, I said finally. I'm too angry, too hurt. Anything I decide right now would come from pain, not wisdom. But there are some immediate changes. She swallowed. Okay. First, I said, this ends completely. No more texts, no more calls, no more meetups. If there's anything left between you and Mark, this conversation is pointless. I didn't call Mark the next day or the day after that, partly because I needed my anger to settle into something I could hold without dropping, and partly because I wanted to see if he would reach out on his own once Lauren cut him off like she'd promised. But the silence from his side of the world was as telling as any message. This was a man who'd spent months sneaking through back channels, and now, when confronted with the prospect of daylight, he disappeared into the digital equivalent of a locked room. No calls, no texts, no casual "hey man, how's it going?" that he'd usually send when the Panthers were playing or when some new tech gadget dropped, and that absence only confirmed what I already knew. If there was going to be a conversation, I'd have to be the one to start it. The first couple of days after my confrontation with Lauren were a blur of tense politeness and heavy quiet. We moved around each other in the house like people learning new choreography, careful not to bump into each other too hard, careful not to step on fresh bruises. She canceled a couple of shifts, claiming she needed personal time, and I didn't ask what she told her coworkers because whatever spin she used there was her business. My focus was on the truth inside our four walls. We agreed, if you could call it that, to see a marriage counselor the following week, not as a promise to stay together forever, but as a commitment to sit in a room and at least try to understand how we'd gotten here. Because even if we ended things, we both needed to walk away knowing why, not just how. In the meantime, I took long walks with Milo, answered Jenna's check-in calls with more honesty than I'd ever used when talking about my marriage. And every now and then, I'd open my phone to that backup, not to torture myself with the messages again, but to remind myself that this wasn't a nightmare my brain had invented. It had happened, it was real, and I was allowed to respond to it with boundaries, not just heartbreak. On day 3, after a particularly restless night where I dreamed of sitting between Lauren and Mark on the couch while they texted each other over my shoulder, I woke up with an odd sense of clarity. Avoidance wasn't going to give me closure. I needed to see Mark's face when he realized the game was over. So I did something simple. I texted him, "Need to talk, just us tonight." He responded in under 30 seconds, which told me he'd been waiting for this in his own way. "Sure, man, everything okay?" The audacity of the question almost made me laugh. "Not even close," I wrote back. 8 p.m. O'Malley's was our usual sports bar, the place we'd met at least twice a month for 15 years, where our history was soaked into the leather of the booths and the grain of the wooden tables. It felt fitting. If I was going to dismantle our friendship, I wanted to do it in the place where we'd built so much of it. The hours until 8 stretched like taffy. Lauren asked quietly, "Are you going to see him?" And when I nodded, she bit her lip, eyes shiny. "Please don't do anything that gets you in trouble," she said. "He's not worth it." "I'm not going to hit him," I replied, slipping on my jacket. "I'm going to tell him exactly who he is to me now." She didn't argue, just whispered, "I'm sorry," in a voice so small it barely crossed the space between us. At O'Malley's, the familiar smell of fried food and spilled beer greeted me like a ghost of simpler times. The waitress smiled in recognition, pointed me toward your usual spot in the back. Mark was already there, nursing a beer, scrolling his phone like it was any other night. When he looked up and saw me, his face lit with that easy, practiced grin that used to make me feel like everything was fine just because he was around. He said, standing to clap me on the shoulder. "Been a minute, you okay? You sounded weird." I stepped back, letting his hand fall short of contact. His grin faltered. He took a longer look at me, registering the tension in my posture, the way my eyes didn't soften. "What's going on?" he asked, more cautious now. I sat down across from him, placed my phone on the table, and for a second we just looked at each other, two men with nearly half a lifetime of shared history stretched out between us like a bridge someone had quietly cut in the middle. "I backed up our iCloud," I said calmly, "the old one from 6 weeks ago." A flicker crossed his face, not confusion, not yet, but a hint of something else, like a man smelling smoke before seeing flames. "Okay," he said slowly. And I tapped the phone screen, pulling up a screenshot of one of his messages to Lauren. "Last night was dangerous, but worth it." I slid the phone across the table to him and watched the recognition land. He stared at the screen for a long moment, color draining from his face, shoulders stiffening. Then, unbelievably, he let out a small, strained laugh. "Ethan, I can explain," he started, and I cut him off, not with volume, but with 4 words. "Don't insult me further." He swallowed, the Adam's apple in his throat bobbing. "How much did you—" "Enough," I said. "Enough to know you've been sleeping with my wife. Enough to know it's been going on for months. Enough to know you used my trust, my friendship, as cover while you slid through my life like a thief who thinks he's charming enough to be invited back after the robbery." His jaw tightened. He set the phone down, fingers tapping nervously against the table. "It wasn't like that," he said, the classic cheater's phrase. "It was complicated, we didn't plan it. It just— you don't accidentally send a text telling my wife to delete messages." I snapped, my control slipping for the first time. "You don't accidentally park a block away from my house. You do complicated your way into hotel rooms." His face flushed. "You don't understand, man, she don't," I warned, leaning forward. "Don't you dare put this on her like you're some helpless victim of seduction. You're a grown man, Mark. You stood next to me when I married her. You gave a speech about loyalty and brotherhood and how you'd always have our backs. And then you spent months proving those words were worth less than the napkin you wrote them on." He opened his mouth, shut it, then tried a different angle. "Look, Ethan, I'm not proud of what happened. It got out of hand. But you have to admit things between you and Lauren, they haven't been great for a while. She was lonely. You were always working. She needed to talk to me," I said flatly. "Not crawl into bed with the person I trusted most. And you—" I tilted my head, studying him. "What did you need? A thrill, a new challenge. To prove you could take anything you wanted, even the one person you knew I'd never suspect you with." His jaw flexed. For a moment, the charming mask slipped, revealing something harder, more selfish beneath. "You always thought you were above this stuff," he said quietly. "Like your life was so secure just because you did everything right. Pay bills, be a good husband, be the reliable guy. You never thought you could lose her. You never thought someone more exciting might come along." There it was, the ugly truth of his worldview laid bare. "So you decided to be that someone," I said, "not because you loved her, not because you thought she'd be happier with you, but because you wanted to prove a point to me, to yourself." He didn't answer, and that was answer enough. I sat back, feeling that numbness again, but under it something else had taken root, a clarity about who this man really was when loyalty cost him something. "I'm not here to yell," I said after a moment. I'm not here to start a fight, I'm here to make things extremely clear. Our friendship, it's over completely. You don't call me, you don't text me, you don't show up at my house. You don't try to fix this like men. There is no fixing this. You broke something you don't get to rebuild. He flinched, anger sparking in his eyes. So that's it, 20 years gone, you set it on fire, I said calmly. I'm just walking away from the ashes instead of pretending it's still a house. He scoffed, but there was desperation in it. Come on, Ethan, be reasonable. Couples get past this stuff. Guys screw up. Friendships take hits. You really gonna throw it all away over one mistake? I stared at him, stunned by how small he thought this was. One mistake, I repeated. A mistake is forgetting a birthday, saying something stupid in an argument. This was a months-long campaign of lying, sneaking, coordinating, making sure I stayed in the dark while you took what you wanted. That's not a mistake, Mark, that's a character. For a brief second he looked like he might actually apologize, truly apologize, not the self-serving kind. His shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, he said quietly, and I believe that a part of him meant it, but apology and accountability are not the same thing. Here's what that means to me, I replied. You stay out of my life, you stay away from Lauren. If we decide to separate, you don't circle back pretending you're her consolation prize. You don't weaponize whatever she told you about our marriage. You let us clean up the mess you helped make without adding fresh footprints through the debris. He stared at me, trying to gauge how serious I was, and if I do. He asked, something defiant rising in him. I held his gaze steadily. Then the people you impress with your charm, your colleagues, your board buddies, the foundation directors, will get an honest, factual account of how you used your influence in their spaces to pursue your best friend's wife. No embellishment, no drama, just the truth with timestamps. You say you're not proud of what happened. Prove it by not making me do that. For the first time since I sat down, he looked genuinely shaken. His mouth opened, then closed, and he looked away, jaw clenched. We sat in silence for a long moment, then I stood up. Goodbye, Mark, I said. He didn't reach for me this time, didn't try to stop me. Just watch me leave, eyes burning, the realization finally dawning that I meant every word. Outside, the night air felt colder than usual. I texted Lauren one line. I talked to him, it's done. Her reply came after a few minutes. Thank you, I know you didn't do it for me, but thank you. She was right, I hadn't done it for her, I'd done it for myself, for the version of me that refused to live with illusions anymore. For the part of me that knew that, whatever happened next, whether we stayed together or parted ways, I needed to walk into that future with my eyes wide open, not glued to the comforting shadows of denial. And as I drove home, the weight of the last few days pressing against my chest, I realized that the someone I never expected, this whole mess had truly led me to wasn't just Mark's real character or even Lauren's hidden restlessness. It was me, the version of me who could stand in front of painful truth, feel it fully, and still choose integrity over vengeance. When I left O'Malley's that night, the cold Raleigh air hit my face like a reset button. Sobering in a way that had nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with the reality that one chapter of my life had just ended and another was starting whether I liked it or not. And when I walked back into the house, Lauren was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched tea, eyes swollen, fingers wrapped around the ceramic like she was afraid of letting go of anything else that day. And for a moment we just looked at each other. Two people in the same space, but not in the same place anymore. Did you see him? She asked, voice small. Yes, I said, it's over. She nodded, a broken kind of relief crossing her face, relief that wasn't about keeping Mark, but about finally having the lie ripped fully away. We didn't have a big dramatic fight that night. No screaming, no plates thrown, no epic monologues, just quiet exhaustion and the knowledge that the damage was done, and now the only choice left was what to do with the wreckage. I slept in the guest room not as an angry punishment, but because I needed physical space to match the emotional distance between us. And lying there staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized that the person I'd been before those deleted messages, the Ethan who trusted easily, who assumed loyalty was a given, who believed doing everything right guaranteed protection from this kind of pain, was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone raw but strangely clearer, like a wound that had finally been cleaned out. Over the next few weeks, we started counseling. Not the kind where you go in holding hands and talk about miscommunications over vacation planning, but the kind where everything is on the table: affair, resentment, loneliness, my emotional autopilot, her restlessness, our quiet drift from partners into co-managers of a household. The therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Patel, didn't let either of us hide behind easy narratives. She asked hard questions. When did you first feel unseen? She asked Lauren. When did you first choose comfort over curiosity? She asked me. There were sessions where I walked out feeling hopeful, thinking maybe this was salvageable, that maybe we could build something different on top of the rubble. There were others where I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt, convinced we were just prolonging the inevitable. The affair didn't vanish because we talked about it. It sat in the room with us every session, a third presence neither of us could fully ignore. But something did start to shift. Lauren stopped framing herself as only a victim of her own bad choices and started truly acknowledging what she'd done to me. No, if I hurt you, no, we both made mistakes, smokescreens, real words. I betrayed you, I broke something we may never fix, I'm sorry. And I slowly started to admit that while her actions were entirely her responsibility, there were cracks in our marriage I'd refused to see, ways I'd pulled away into work, assumed she was fine because she wasn't complaining loudly enough, treated our routines like guarantees instead of things that needed care. Owning those truths didn't excuse what she did, but it helped me understand how we got to a place where an affair could take root at all. Meanwhile, Mark vanished from my life in every way that mattered. He unfollowed me on social media, stopped showing up to mutual gatherings, and when a mutual friend asked why we weren't hanging out anymore, I didn't lie. I didn't give them every detail, but I gave them enough. He crossed a line with my marriage, I'd say calmly. We're not friends anymore. People drew their own conclusions, some distanced themselves from him, others stayed neutral. That was fine. I wasn't out to destroy his life. I just wasn't going to protect his reputation at the expense of my own story. A few months in, Lauren's clinic announced a restructuring. The promotion Mark had dangled in front of her like bait never materialized. A different candidate with a spotless record and no secret scandal got the job. The foundation contract with his company went to another firm after some quiet conversations Jenna helped facilitate. Nothing dramatic, nothing public, just a series of decisions made by people who knew more than they used to. Lauren stayed employed, but on a different path than the one she'd imagined, one that would now be built on transparency instead of backroom promises. We made it to 6 months post-discovery. In that time, we rebuilt some trust, but not all of it. She showed me her phone freely, not as a performance, but because she no longer wanted hidden pockets in her life. I still checked our backups now and then, not obsessively, but as a man who had learned the hard way that it could never happen to me is not a security policy. We laughed together sometimes, genuinely. We had nights that felt almost normal, but there was always a faint wobble in the floor, like walking in an old house where one board always creaks in the same spot. One evening, after a particularly honest session with Dr. Patel, we sat in the car in the therapist's parking lot, the late afternoon light slicing through the windshield. Lauren stared straight ahead and said, "Do you think you'll ever look at me the way you used to?" The question hung there. In the past, I might have rushed to comfort, to say something like, "Of course we'll get there." This time I didn't. I thought about it. "No," I said gently, "I don't think I will, not because I hate you, but because I know more now. About you, about me, about us. I can't unknow it. I don't see that as all bad. It means if we stay together, it'll be a conscious choice, not autopilot. But it also means what we had before is gone." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. "I appreciate the honesty," she whispered. A few weeks later, I made a decision, not impulsively, not out of anger, out of that same clarity that had been slowly growing since the night I opened that old backup. One quiet Saturday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, Milo curled at my feet, and asked Lauren to sit down. She wore an old sweatshirt, hair pulled into a messy bun, no makeup, just her, no performances. "What's wrong?" she asked, though her eyes already guessed. I took a breath. "I've been thinking about this a lot," I said. "About us, about the future, about who we are now versus who we were. And I've come to a conclusion I didn't expect to arrive at so calmly." She listened, bracing herself. "I think the healthiest, most honest thing we can do," I continued, "is let this marriage end." Her face crumpled. Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a second I thought she might argue, beg, throw out promises of change. But instead she did something I didn't expect. She nodded, even as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I've been afraid you'd say that," she whispered, "and I've also been afraid you wouldn't, that we'd just stay half alive for the rest of our lives." Relief and grief collided in my chest. "I don't hate you," I said, wanting that to be clear. "I don't want to punish you or take everything. I just don't want to build the rest of my life on a foundation I know cracked once. Maybe some people can. I've realized I'm not one of them." We parted like that, not in a dramatic courtroom shouting match, not with friends choosing sides and lawyers tearing us apart, but with quiet paperwork, divided assets, and an understanding that while she had broken something precious, I was choosing not to break us further with cruelty. We sold the house. She moved closer to the clinic, into a small apartment with plants on the windowsill and a coffee shop downstairs. I bought a modest townhouse a few miles away, closer to Jenna and my favorite running trails. Milo stayed with me